Chapter 1 of Book 1 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. All men by nature are actuated with the desire of knowledge, and an indication of this is the love of the senses. For even irrespective of their utility are they loved for their own sakes, and preeminently above the rest the sense of sight. For not only for practical purposes, but also when not intent on doing anything, we choose the power of vision in preference, so to say, to all the rest of the senses. And a cause of this is the following, that this one of the senses particularly enables us to apprehend whatever knowledge it is the inlet of, and that it makes many distinctive qualities manifest. By nature then, indeed, are animals formed endowed with sense, but in some of them memory is not innate from sense, and in others it is. And for this reason are these possessed of more foresight, as well as a greater aptitude for discipline, than those which are wanting in this faculty of memory. Those furnished with foresight, indeed, are yet without the capability of receiving instruction, whatever amongst them are unable to understand the sounds they hear, as, for instance, bees, and other similar tribes of animals. But those are capable of receiving instruction as many as, in addition to memory, are provided with this sense also. The rest, indeed, subsist then through impressions and the operations of memory, but share experience in a slight degree, whereas the human race exists by means of art also, and the powers of reasoning. Now experience accrues to men from memory, for repeated acts of memory about the same thing done constitute the force of a single experience, and experience seems to be a thing almost similar to science and art. But science and art result unto men by means of experience. For experience, indeed, as Polus saith, and correctly so, has produced art, but inexperience, chance. But an art comes into being when, out of many conceptions of experience, one universal opinion is evolved with respect to similar cases. For, indeed, to entertain the opinion that this particular remedy has been of service to Callias, while labouring under this particular disease, as well as to Socrates, and so individually to many, this is an inference of experience. But that it has been conducive to the health of all, such as have been defined according to one species, while labouring under this disease, as, for instance, to the phlegmatic, or the choleric, or those sick of a burning fever, this belongs to the province of art. As regards, indeed, practical purposes, therefore, experience seems in no wise to differ from art. Nay, even we see the experienced compassing their objects more effectually than those who possess a theory without the experience. But a cause of this is the following, that experience, indeed, is a knowledge of singulars, whereas art of universals. But all things in the doing, and all generations, are concerned about the singular. For he whose profession it is to practise medicine does not restore man to health, save by accident. But Callias, or Socrates, or any of the rest so designated to whom it happens to be a man. If, therefore, any one without the experience is furnished with the principle, and is acquainted with the universal, but is ignorant of the singular that is involved therein, he will frequently fall into error in the case of his medical treatment, for that which is capable of cure is rather the singular. But, nevertheless, we are of opinion that at least knowledge and understanding appertain to art rather than experience, and we reckon artists more wise than the experienced, inasmuch as wisdom is the concomitant of all philosophers rather in proportion to their knowledge. But this is so because some indeed are aware of the cause, and some are not. For the experienced indeed know that a thing is so, but they do not know wherefore it is so. But others, I mean the scientific, are acquainted with the wherefore and the cause. Therefore also we reckon the chief artificers in each case to be entitled to more dignity, and to the reputation of superior knowledge, and to be more wise than the handicraftsmen, because the former are acquainted with the causes of the things that are being constructed, whereas the latter produce things as certain inanimate things do, indeed. Yet these perform their functions unconsciously, as the fire when it burns. Things indeed, therefore, that are inanimate by a certain constitution of nature perform each of these their functions, but the handicraftsmen through habit, inasmuch as it is not according as men are practical that they are more wise, but according as they possess the reason of a thing, and understand causes. And, upon the whole, a proof of a person's having knowledge is even the ability to teach, and for this reason we consider art, rather than experience, to be a science, for artists can, whereas the handicraftsmen cannot, convey instruction. And further, we regard none of the senses to be wisdom, although, at least, these are the most decisive sources of knowledge about singulars. But they make no affirmation of the wherefore in regard of anything, as, for example, why fire is hot, but only the fact that it is hot. Therefore, indeed, is it natural for the person who first discovers any art whatsoever, beyond the ordinary power of the senses, to be the object of human admiration, not only on account of something of the things that have been discovered being useful, but as one that is wise and superior to the rest of men. But when more arts are being discovered, both some indeed in relation to things that are necessary, and others for pastime, we invariably regard such more wise than those on account of their sciences not being for bare utility. Whence, all things of such a sort having been already procured, those sciences have been invented which were pursued neither for purposes of pleasure nor necessity, and first in those places where the inhabitants enjoyed leisure. Wherefore, in the neighbourhood of Egypt the mathematical arts were first established, for there leisure was spared unto the sacerdotal caste. It has then, indeed, been declared in the Ethics what is the difference between an art and a science, and the rest of the things of the same description. But at present the reason of our producing this treatise is the fact that all consider what is termed wisdom to be conversant about first causes and principles, so that, as has been said on a former occasion, the experienced seem to be more wise than those possessing any sense whatsoever, and the artificer than the experienced, and the master artist than the handicraftsman, and the speculative rather than those that are productive. That, indeed, wisdom therefore is a science conversant about certain causes and first principles is obvious. Chapter 2. Now, since we are engaged in investigating this science, the following must form a subject for our consideration, namely, about what kind of causes and what kind of first principles is this science, I mean wisdom, conversant. If, doubtless, one would receive the opinions which we entertain concerning the wise man, perhaps from this our proposed inquiry would be evident the more. Now, in the first place, indeed, we go on the supposition that the wise man especially is acquainted with all things scientifically as far as this is possible, not, however, having a scientific knowledge of them singly. In the next place, a person who is capable of knowing things that are difficult and not easy for a man to understand, such a one we deem wise, for perception by the senses is common to all, wherefore it is a thing that is easy, and by no means wise. Further, one who is more accurate and more competent to give instruction in the causes of things we regard more wise about every science. And of the sciences also, that which is desirable for its own account, and for the sake of knowledge, we consider to be wisdom in preference to that which is eligible on account of its probable results. And that which is more qualified for preeminence we regard as wisdom, rather than that which is subordinate. For that the wise man ought not to be dictated to, but should dictate unto others, and that this person ought not to be swayed in his opinions by another, but one less wise by this man. Respecting this wisdom and wise men do we entertain such and so many suppositions. But of these characteristics, the scientific knowledge of all things must needs be found in him most especially who possesses the universal science. For this person, in a manner, knows all things that are subjects of it. But also the most difficult nearly for men to know are the things that are especially universal, for they are most remote from the senses. But the most accurate of the sciences are those respecting things that are primary, in the most eminent sense of the word. For those from fewer principles are more accurate than those said to be from addition, as arithmetic than geometry. But also that science, without doubt, is more adapted towards giving instruction, at least which speculates about causes. For those do afford instruction who assign the causes in regard of each individual thing. Now, understanding and scientific knowledge, for their own sakes, most especially reside in the science of that which is most particularly fitted for being scientifically known. For he who selects scientific knowledge for its own sake will especially choose that which is preeminently science. But such is that which is the science of that which is particularly fitting as an object of scientific knowledge. And particularly fitting as objects of scientific knowledge are first principles and causes. For on account of these, and by means of these, are the other objects of knowledge capable of being made known. But not these by means of those things that are subordinate to them. Most fit for preeminence likewise amongst the sciences, and fit for preeminence in preference to that which is subservient, is the science which communicates the knowledge of that on account of which each thing is to be done. But this constitutes the good in each particular, but in general that which is the best in every nature. From all, therefore, that has been stated, the sought-for appellation lights upon the same science, for it is necessary that this be a science speculative of first principles and of causes. For the good also, viewed as a final cause, is one from amongst our classified list of causes. But that the science under investigation is not a science employed in producing is evident from the case of those who formed systems of philosophy in the earliest ages. For from wonder men, both now and at the first, began to philosophize, having felt astonishment originally at the things which were more obvious, indeed, amongst those that were doubtful. Then, by degrees, in this way having advanced onwards, and in process of time having started difficulties about more important subjects, as, for example, respecting the passive conditions of the moon, and those brought to pass about the sun and stars, and respecting the generation of the universe. But he that labours under perplexity and wonder thinks that he is involved in ignorance. Therefore also the philosopher, that is, the lover of wisdom, is somehow a lover of fables. For the fable is made up of the things that are marvellous. Wherefore, if for the avoidance of ignorance men from time to time have been induced to form systems of philosophy, it is manifest that they went in pursuit of scientific knowledge for the sake of understanding it, and not on account of any utility that it might possess. But the event itself also bears witness to the truth of this statement. For, on the supposition of almost all those things being in existence that are requisite towards both ease and the management of life, prudence of such a sort as this began to be in requisition. Therefore is it evident that we seek scientific knowledge from no other actual ground of utility save what springs from itself. But as we say a free man exists who is such for his own sake and not for the sake of another, so also this alone of the sciences is free, for this alone subsists for its own sake. Wherefore, also, the acquisition of this science may be justly regarded as not human, for in many instances human nature is servile. So that, according to Simonides, the Deity only should enjoy this prerogative, yet that it is unworthy for a man not to investigate the knowledge that is in conformity with his own condition. But if, in reality, the poets make any such assertion, and if the Godhead is in its nature constituted so as to envy, in this respect it is especially natural that it should happen, and that all those that are over subtle should be unfortunate. But neither does the divine essence admit of being affected by envy, but, according to the proverb, the bards utter many falsehoods. Nor ought we to consider any other science more entitled to honour than such as that under investigation at present. For that which is most divine is also most worthy of honour, but such will be so in only two ways. For that which the Deity would especially possess is a divine one amongst the sciences, and if there is any such science, this would be the case with the science of things divine. But this science, such as we have described it, alone is possessed of both of these characteristics. For to all speculators both the Deity appear as a cause and a certain first principle. And such a science as this, either God alone, or he principally, would possess. Therefore, indeed, may all sciences else be more requisite than this one, but none is more excellent. It is, indeed, necessary, in a manner, to establish the order of this science in its development in a direction contrary to the speculations that have been carried on from the beginning. For, indeed, as we have remarked, all men commence their inquiries from wonder whether a thing be so, as in the case of the spontaneous movements of jugglers' figures to those who have not as yet speculated into their cause, or respecting the solstices, or the incommensurability of the diameter. For it seems to be a thing astonishing to all, if any quantity of those that are the smallest is not capable of being measured. But it is necessary to draw our inquiry to a close in a direction the contrary to this, and towards what is better, according to the proverb, as also happens in the case of these, when they succeed in learning those points. For nothing would a geometrician so wonder at as if the diameter of a square should be commensurable with its side. What, therefore, is the nature of the science under investigation has been declared, as also what the aim should be which the present inquiry and the entire treatise should strive and attain. Chapter 3. But since it is manifest that one ought to be in possession of a science of primary causes, for then we say that we know each individual thing when we think that we are acquainted with the first cause, and since causes are denominated under 4 different heads, the first of which we assert to be the substance and the essence of a thing, for the inquiry of the wherefore in the first instance of a thing is referred to the last reason, but the first wherefore of a thing is a cause and first principle, and the second cause we affirm to be the matter and the subject, and the third is the source of the first principle of motion, and the fourth the cause that is in opposition to this, namely both the final cause and the good, for such is an end of every generation. Therefore although there has been a sufficient amount of speculation concerning these in our treatise on physics, let us however bring forward those who before our time have approached to an examination of entities, and have formed systems of philosophy respecting truth. For it is obvious that they also affirm that there are in existence certain first principles and causes. Therefore will it, at any rate, be of service to our present treatise, should we take a review of these philosophers, for either we shall thereby discover a certain different description of cause, or we shall in preference repose our confidence in those that have been already enumerated. Now, the majority of those who first formed systems of philosophy consider those that subsist in a form of matter to be alone the principles of all things. For wherefrom all entities arise, and wherefrom they are generated, as from an original, and whereto they are corrupted, ultimately the substance, indeed, remaining permanent, but in its passive states undergoing a change, this they assert to be an element, and this a first principle of all things. And for this reason they are of opinion that nothing is either produced or destroyed, inasmuch as such a constitution of nature is always in a state of conservation. As we say that Socrates neither is absolutely brought into being when he may become handsome or musical, nor that he is destroyed when he may throw aside these habits on account of the fact of the subject, namely, Socrates himself remaining permanent. So neither is it the case with anything else that it is either generated or corrupted anew. For it is necessary that there should be a certain nature, either one or more than one, from which the other entities are produced, that remaining in a state of conservation. The plurality, indeed, and the species of such a first principle all do not affirm to be the same. But Thales, indeed, the founder of this kind of philosophy, affirms the nature just mentioned to be water, wherefore also he declared the earth to be superimposed upon water, probably deriving his opinion from observing that the nutriment of all things is moist, and that even actual heat is therefrom generated, and that animal life is sustained by this. But that wherefrom a thing is produced, this is a first principle of all things. And doubtless for this reason, likewise holding such a theory, both from the fact of the seeds of all things possessing a moist nature, and of water being a first principle of their nature to things that are humid. But there are some who suppose those who lived in the most ancient times, and far previous to the present generation, and who first formed schemes of theology, to have also entertained opinions after this manner concerning nature. For these philosophers constituted both Oceanus and Tethys as the parents of generation, and water as the object of adjuration amongst the gods, called Styx by the poets themselves, for most entitled to respect is that which is most ancient. Now an object of adjuration is a thing most entitled to respect. Whether, therefore, there is this certain early and ancient opinion concerning nature, in all likelihood would be an obscure point to decide. Thales, indeed, is said to have declared his sentiments in this manner concerning the first cause, for no one would deign to place Hippo along with these on account of the meanness of his intellect. But Anaximenes and Diogenes placed air before water, and especially as a cause of simple bodies, whereas Hippasus of Metapontum and Heraclitus of Ephesus fire. But Empedocles introduced 4 bodies, that is, one in addition to those 3 already mentioned, adding earth as a 4th, for that these ever continued permanent, and further that they are not produced, save that either in plurality or in paucity they are compounded together or dissolved into one, and from one component element. But Anaxagoras of Clazomena, in age indeed being prior to this speculator, but in his works subsequent to him, maintains that first principles are infinite, For he asserts that almost all things being homogeneous, as water or fire, in this way are produced and destroyed by concretion and dissolution merely, but that in other respects no entities were either brought into existence or caused to cease to exist, but continued as things that are everlasting. From these things indeed, therefore, one would suppose that the only cause with these philosophers was that said to exist in a form of matter. But as these speculators advanced in this way, the thing itself guided them and constrained them to investigate further. For though every possible corruption and generation is from something subsisting, as one or more, yet why does this happen, and what is the cause of this? For undoubtedly the subject at least itself is in no wise instrumental in making itself undergo a change. Now I say, for example, that neither the wood nor the brass is the cause of either of these bodies undergoing a change, neither does the wood indeed produce a bed, and the brass a statue, but there is something else that is a cause of change. But the investigation of this is the investigation of a different principle, that is, the second cause, as we have stated, the principle of the origin of motion. Those indeed, therefore, who from the earliest times have altogether adopted such a method as this, and affirmed the subject to be one, have created no difficulty for themselves. But some of these, at least, who say that it is one, as if overpowered by this investigation, assert that the one is immovable, and the entire of nature, not only according to generation and corruption, for this is an ancient dogma, and one which all acknowledge, but also according to every other change whatever, and this a tenet peculiar to themselves. Of those, indeed, therefore, who affirm the universe to be one merely, to none has it occurred to see clearly into a cause of such a kind, unless perhaps to Parmenides, and to him so far as that he lays down not one merely, but somehow even two ceases to exist. And for those, truly, who make them more numerous, is it allowable rather to assert the existence of such a cause as the efficient cause, I mean, those who make causes to be the hot and the cold, or fire and earth, for they employ the fire as possessing a motive nature, but water and earth and such like as something that is contrary to this. But after these philosophers, and after the assertion of principles of this sort, as if on the grounds of their insufficiency to generate the nature of entities, again constrained by actual truth, as we have said, they investigated the principle next following in the way of a consequence. For of the excellent and beautiful order of some things, and of the production of others of the entities, it is not natural to assign, perhaps, either earth or anything of this kind as a cause, nor is it natural that they should think that it is. Nor was it seemly, on the other hand, to attribute so important a part to chance and fortune. Now, whosoever affirmed mind, as in animals, so also in nature, to be the cause of the system of the world, and of the entire harmony of it, the same appeared, as it were, of sober temperament in comparison with the vain theorists of the earlier ages. Indeed, then, we know that Anaxagoras openly adopted these principles. Hermodamus of Clazomena, however, has the credit assigned him of having put forward a similar theory of causation at an earlier period. Those, indeed, therefore, who have entertained these opinions have laid down as a first principle of entities at the same time the cause of their orderly arrangement, with such a one as that of the origin of motion in things. End of chapter 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. 4 of Book 1 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 4. Some one, however, might indulge in the surmise that Hesiod was the first to broach such a description of cause as the above, and that this is the case with whatsoever other speculator, if any, that may have placed love or desire as a first principle in entities, as, for instance, also Parmenides. For this philosopher, likewise, in drawing up his scheme of the generation of the universe, says, quote, the first thing of all the gods indeed planned he love. Close quote. But Hesiod's words are, quote, first indeed of all was chaos, but next in order earth with her spacious bosom, then love, who is preeminent amongst all the immortals. Close quote. Just as if it were necessary that in entities there should subsist some cause which will impart motion, and hold bodies in union together. How indeed then in regard of these one ought to distribute them as to their order of priority can be decided afterwards. But also, since things contrary to those that are good appeared inherent in nature, and not only order and the beautiful, but also disorder and what is base, and since the evil things were more numerous than the good, and the worthless than the fair, accordingly some one else introduced harmony and discord as a cause severally of each of these. For if any one would follow the subject up, and form his opinion according to the faculty of thought, and not according to the obscure assertions of Empedocles, he will find harmony indeed to be a cause of the things that are good, and discord of those that are evil. Wherefore, if any should say that Empedocles both in a certain sense affirms, and that he was the first to affirm, that the evil and the good are first principles, perhaps he would make such an assertion correctly, if the cause of all things that are good be the good itself, and of those that are evil the evil. These persons indeed, therefore, as we have said, even thus far have adopted into their systems two causes, as we have defined them in our Physics. I mean the material cause and the principle of the origin of motion, that is, the efficient cause, obscurely no doubt, and by no means clearly, but in a manner like the conduct of those who are unexercised in battles. For these latter also, advancing forwards against their adversaries, strike frequently skilful blows, but neither do those combatants act thus from a scientific system, nor do these early speculators appear like men who understand that they are making the assertions which they actually are. For in no respect almost do they appear to employ these first principles, save to a small extent. For Anaxagoras also employs mind as a machine for the production of the orderly system of the world, and when he finds himself in perplexity as to the cause of its being necessarily so, he then drags it in by force to his assistance. But in the other instances he assigns as a cause of the things that are being produced everything else in preference to mind. And Empedocles, to an extent further than this last named philosopher, employs his causes, however, neither adequately, nor does he discover in them that which confessedly is involved in them. Frequently, at least, in his system, the harmony indeed separates, and the discord unites things together. For when the universe may be dissolved into its component elements by reason of discord, then fire is commingled into one and each of the rest of the elements. But when all things, by reason of harmony, may unite into one, it is necessary that the parts from each undergo separation again. Empedocles then, indeed, in contradistinction to the early speculators, first introduced this cause, having divided it, not having constituted as single the first principle of motion, but first principles thereof, which are different and opposite. but, moreover, the reputed elements in form of matter he was the first to assert the existence of as being 4 in number. He did not, doubtless, employ at least 4, but regarded them as if there were only 2, fire by itself, and those things that are opposed to this as one nature, namely, both earth and air and water. But one may acquire this information by drawing the speculation itself from his poetry. This philosopher, indeed, therefore, as we have stated, enumerated his first principles in this way, and affirmed them to be so many in number. But Leucippus and his companion Democritus assert that the full and the empty are elements, terming, for instance, the one indeed an entity, and the other a non-entity, and of these the full and solid they call an entity, and the empty and the attenuated a non-entity. Wherefore they say that entity, in no respect less than non-entity, has an existence, because neither has the vacuum a being more than corporeity, and that these are the causes of entities as material causes. And as they who make the substance which is the subject one, generate all things else by means of the passive conditions of this substance, assigning the rare and the dense as first principles of these affections, in the same manner these also affirm that differences are causes of the other things. They indeed say that these are 3, even figure, and order, and position. For they affirm that entity differs merely in rhythm and diathege and trope. Out of these the rhythm is figure, and the diathege order, and the trope position. For indeed the letter A differs from the letter N in figure, and N from N-A in order, and Z from N in position. But respecting motion, whence or how it exists in entities, in like manner, with the rest of the early speculators, have these carelessly neglected such inquiries. Respecting then 2 causes of the 4, according to the statements we have just made, so far has it appeared that an inquiry has been prosecuted by our predecessors. Chapter 5. But amongst these, and prior to them, those called Pythagoreans, applying themselves to the study of the mathematical sciences, first advanced these views, and having been nurtured therein, they considered the first principles of these to be the first principles of all entities. But since among these numbers by nature are the first, and in numbers they fancied they beheld many resemblances for entities and things that are being produced, rather than in fire and earth and water, because, to give an instance, such a particular property of numbers is justice, and such soul and mind, and another different one is opportunity, and it is the case, so to speak, in like manner with each of the other things. Moreover, also, in numbers, discerning the passive conditions and reasons of harmonies, since it was apparent that, indeed, other things in their nature were in all points assimilated unto numbers, and that the numbers were the first of the entire of nature, hence they supposed the elements of numbers to be the elements of all entities, and the whole heaven to be an harmony and number. And as many phenomena as they could demonstrate to be conformable, both in their numbers and harmonies, with the passive conditions and parts of the heaven, and with its entire arrangement, these they collected and adapted to their philosophy. And if there was any interval left anywhere, they supplied the deficiency, in order that there might be a chain of connexion running through their entire system. Now, I say, as an illustration, since the decade seems to be a thing that is perfect, and to have comprised the entire nature of numbers, hence they also assert that the bodies that are borne through the heaven are truly 10 in number, and whereas 9 only are apparent, on this account they constitute the confronting earth 10th. but respecting these theorists we have arrived at more accurate decisions in other parts of our works. But the reason why we have gone in review through these philosophers is this, in order that we may receive also from them what they have already laid down as being first principles, and in what manner they fall in with the causes just enumerated. Undoubtedly do these appear to consider number to be a first principle, and, as it were, a material cause of entities, and as both their passive conditions and habits, and that the even and the odd are elements of number, and of these, that the one is finite and the other infinite, and that unity, doubtless, is composed of both of these, for that it is both even and odd, and that number is composed of unity, and that, as has been stated, the entire heaven is composed of numbers. But others of these very philosophers affirm that first principles are 10 in number, denominated in accordance with the following coordinate series, namely, bound, infinity, odd, even, unity, plurality, right, left, male, female, rest, motion, straight, crooked, light, darkness, good, bad, square, oblong. In the same manner seems Alcmaeon of Crotona to have formed his opinion, and this philosopher certainly, either from those just named, or they from this person, have derived this their theory, for Alcmaeon had reached the age of manhood when Pythagoras was an old man, but he enumerated his sentiments in a manner similar with the Pythagoreans, for he affirms that the greater portion of things human may be reduced to two classes, calling them contrarieties, not distinguished as these had distinguished them, but such as were of any casual sort whatever, as, for example, white, black, sweet, bitter, good, bad, small, great. This philosopher indeed, then, has indefinitely thrown out his opinions about the rest, but the Pythagoreans have declared both how numerous and which these contrarieties are. From both of these, therefore, it is possible to acquire thus much information, that contraries are first principles of entities, but how numerous and which these are may be ascertained only from other speculators. How, indeed, in respect of the causes enumerated, it is possible to draw up a compendious application of their principles has not, in distinct terms, been clearly declared by them, but they seem to arrange the elements as in a form of matter, for of these, as inherent, they say that the substance consists, and has been moulded. Of the ancients, therefore, indeed, even of those who assert the elements of nature to be many, it is sufficient from these statements to examine into their intention. But there are some who have declared their opinions about the universe as though it were one nature, but all have not put forward their theories in the same manner, either in regard of that which is constituted in an orderly way, or of that which is in accordance with the course of nature. With, indeed, then, the present investigation of causes, does this theory regarding them by no means adapt itself, for they do not, as some of the physiologers, who supposed entity to be one, nevertheless generate them from unity as from matter, but these, who say that entity and unity are the same, assert their production to take place after a different manner. For those, indeed, have added motion at least in their generation of the universe, but these say that it is immovable. Of a truth, however, so far at least the theory of this school is akin to our present investigation. For Parmenides, indeed, appears to adopt a system of unity in accordance with reason, whereas Melissus a theory of it according to matter. Wherefore also, indeed, one says that the universe is finite, and the other that it is infinite. Xenophanes, first of these, however, having introduced this system of unity (for Parmenides is said to have been his pupil), made nothing plain, neither did he seem to have apprehended the nature of either of these, but, looking wistfully upon the whole heaven, he affirms that unity is God. These indeed, therefore, as we have stated, must be omitted in regard of our present investigation, two of them entirely, even as being a little too uncivilized, namely Xenophanes and Melissus. Parmenides, however, appears to express himself in some passages with more circumspection, for, with the exception of entity, considering non-entity to have no existence, he thinks entity to be necessarily one, and nothing else. Concerning which philosopher we have spoken with more clearness in our Physics. Yet, compelled to follow the phenomena, and supposing unity to subsist according to reason, but plurality according to sense, he again lays down two causes, and two first principles, heat and cold, as, for example, in other words, he means fire and earth. But of these he arranges the one under the category of entity, that is, the hot, and the other under that of non-entity, viz. The cold. From the statements, indeed, therefore, that have been made, and from those who have already devoted themselves to rational speculations, and are wise men, we have derived these views. From the earliest philosophers have we appropriated, indeed, both the corporeal first principle, for water, and fire, and such like, are bodies, and from some of these one such, and from others many corporeal principles, both, however, agreeing in classing them as forms of matter. But from certain amongst these early speculators, who at the same time establish both this cause, and along with this, that of the origin of motion, we have appropriated even this very efficient cause, from some indeed as a single principle, but from others as one that is twofold, up to the period of the Italic sects, and independent of them. The rest of the investigators have spoken with more moderation regarding these first principles, except, as we have said, in the case of those who happen to have employed two causes, and one of these, the second cause, namely the origin of motion. Some, indeed, make single, and others twofold. But the Pythagoreans, in the same manner, have spoken of two first principles, but thus much have they added, which also is peculiar to themselves, namely, that they do not regard the finite, and the infinite, and the one, to be certain different natures, as, for instance, fire, or earth, or any other such thing, but that the infinite itself, and the one itself, constitute the substance of those things of which they are predicated. Wherefore, also, they affirmed that number is the substance of all things. Respecting, then, these points likewise in this manner have they declared their opinions, and respecting quiddity they began indeed to make assertions and to frame definitions, but they treated of matters with great simplicity. For they both framed their definitions superficially, and in whatever first an alleged definition should be inherent, this they considered to be the substance of the thing, as if any one should think that twofold is the same thing with the duad, since the twofold first is inherent in the two. Yet perhaps the being in what is twofold is not the same thing as being in a duad. But if not, unity will be plurality, which also was the result with them. From our predecessors, indeed, therefore, and from the rest, it is possible for us to acquire thus much information. Chapter 6. After the schools of philosophy enumerated, supervenes the system of Plato, in most points treading on the heels of these Pythagoreans, but also having peculiar tenets of its own, differing from the philosophy of the Italics. For from a young man having at the first been associated with Cratylus, and being conversant with the opinions of Heraclitus, that all sensible objects are in a state of continual flux, and that scientific knowledge concerning them had no existence, he indeed subsequently in this way came to entertain these suppositions. But while Socrates was engaged about the formation of systems of ethics, indeed, and that he broached no theory as regards the entire of nature, seeing that he was searching, doubtless, in morals for the universal, and that he was the first to apply his understanding to the subject of definitions, Plato, having applauded him on account of this his investigation of universals, was led to entertain thus much of his supposition, as that this took place in regard of other things, and not in regard of certain of the objects that are cognizant by the senses. For it is impossible, in his opinion, that there should be a common definition of any of the sensible natures, seeing that they are continually in a state of undergoing a change. This philosopher indeed, therefore, termed such things amongst entities ideas, and asserted that all things are styled sensible according as they were different from these, or as they subsisted in accordance with these. For his theory was this, that according to participation, the most of things synonymous are homonymous with the forms. Employing, however, the import of the term participation, he changed the name merely. For the Pythagoreans, indeed, affirm that entities subsist by an imitation of numbers, but Plato by a participation of them, changing the name. At all events, as to participation at least, or imitation, what it may be in the case of forms, they both in common omitted to investigate. But, moreover, besides sensibles and forms, he affirms that mathematical entities are things of an intermediate nature, differing on the one hand from sensibles in being eternal and immovable, but on the other from forms in the fact that the most of such are similar, but that every form itself constituted one thing merely. But since the forms are causes of other things, the elements of all these he supposed to be elements of entities. Therefore, indeed, he regarded the great and the little to be first principles as matter, but unity as substance, for from these, by participation of unity, that the forms are numbers. That, doubtless, unity at least is a substance, and that not any other entity is denominated so, Plato affirmed. Similarly with the Pythagorics, and the dogma that numbers are causes to other things of their substance, he in like manner asserted with them. But in place of the infinite considered as one, the having made a duad, and the having made the infinite out of the great and the small, this was peculiar to him. And, moreover, Plato affirmed the existence of numbers independent of sensibles, whereas the Pythagoreans say that numbers constitute the things themselves, and they do not set down mathematical entities as intermediate between these. The principle of his having made unity, therefore, and numbers as different from things, and not as the Pythagoreans, who regarded them the same as well as the introduction of forms, ensued on account of his logical investigations, for his predecessors took no share in dialectical science. But the constituting a duad as a different nature from the one, arose from the fact that the numbers, with the exception of those that are first, are suitably generated from this as from a certain express image. And yet it happens in a contrary way, for it would not be reasonable that it should take place thus. For indeed, at present, from matter they make many things, whereas form generates only once. And from one matter there appears to be produced one table, but he who introduces form, though being one, makes many tables. In like manner, also, the male stands in relation to the female, for the one is impregnated from a single copulation, whereas the male impregnates many. These, however, are imitations of those first principles. Plato, indeed, therefore, respecting these objects of investigation, laid down distinctions in this way. But it is manifest from the things that have been stated that Plato only employed two causes, namely, both the formal cause and the material cause. For, according to him, forms are the causes of what anything is to the rest of the entities, and unity to the forms, and that there is a certain cause which subsists according to matter, which is that subject through which the forms have a subsistence, that are resident in sensibles, and through which unity is said to be in the forms, because the actual duad constitutes the great and the small. Further, the cause of the well and the ill he ascribed severally to the several elements, which particular point we affirm certain philosophers, such as Empedocles and Anaxagoras, to have investigated more elaborately than the early speculators. Chapter 7. Concisely indeed, therefore, and by way of summary, we have recounted both who they are that have declared their opinions, and in what manner they happen to have spoken concerning both first principles and truth. Nevertheless, however, we have received thus much information from them, that no one of those who have declared their sentiments concerning a first principle and a cause has made any assertion beyond those definitions that have been set down in our Physics. But notwithstanding that all of them have unfolded their views with obscurity indeed, yet in a manner they appear as persons engaged in cursorily treating those four causes enumerated above and elsewhere. For, indeed, some speculators speak of the first principle as matter, whether they may suppose one principle or more to exist, and whether they consider it as body, and whether as a thing that is incorporeal, as, for instance, Plato indeed in his mention of the great and the small, and the Italics in their theory of the infinite, and Empedocles in that of fire, and earth, and water, and air, and Anaxagoras in his system of the infinity of homogeneous things. Now truly all these touched upon a cause of this kind, and further as many as affirmed the existence, as a first principle, of air, or fire, or water, or a substance of greater density than fire, but of greater rarity than air. For certain philosophers have also declared a thing of this sort to be the first element. All these, indeed, therefore, adopted this cause merely in a superficial way. But certain others introduce the second cause, namely, the origin of the principle of motion, as, for instance, as many as make a first principle of harmony and discord, or mind, or love. But of the essence and the substance, that is, of the formal cause, not one, indeed, has rendered a clear account. Most especially do those make assertions respecting it who adopt the hypothesis of forms, and the things inherent in forms, for neither do they suppose that forms, and the things inherent in forms, subsist as matter to sensibles, nor as though from thence were derived the principle of motion, for in preference they assert them to be causes of immobility, and of things being in a state of rest. But in regard of the essence, to each of the other things do forms supply this, and unity imparts it to the forms. But the final cause of actions and changes and motions in a certain manner they assert to be a cause, yet in this way they do not assert it to be a cause, nor do they speak of it in a way conformably to what it naturally is. For they indeed who assign mind or harmony as such have laid down these causes as, doubtless, a something that is good. They do not, however, affirm that from these, as final causes, anything amongst entities either is in existence or is being produced, but that, as it were, from these the emotions of these things were derived. So also, in like manner, they who say that either unity or entity is such a nature of this kind, affirm it to be a cause of substance indeed. Yet they do not, for a certainty, affirm that anything either exists or is produced from this as a final cause. Wherefore it happens unto them, in a manner, both to affirm and not to affirm that the good is a cause of this sort, for they do not make the assertion absolutely, but by accident. That therefore our distinctions have been laid down correctly respecting causes, both as to how numerous and what sort they are, do even all these early philosophers appear to us to bear witness in not being able to fix upon any other cause. And in addition to the testimony of these speculators, it is evident that first principles must be investigated, either all in this way, or in some such mode as has been adopted by these philosophers. Now, how each of these has declared his opinions, and how the case stands in regard of the possible doubts respecting first principles, let us, after this, proceed to pass through a review of such points. End of chapter 7. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 8 of Book 1 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 8. As many indeed, therefore, as set down the universe as both one and a certain single nature, as matter, and this such as is corporeal and involving magnitude, it is obvious that they labour under manifold errors. For they have established the elements of bodies merely, but not of incorporeals, when even there are in existence, I mean, things that are incorporeal. And in endeavouring to assign causes of generation and corruption, and drawing up, concerning all bodies in nature, systems of physiology, they take away the cause of motion. Further, the not positing also the substance as a cause of anything, nor as such the formal principle or the very essence of a thing, this was erroneous. And, in addition to the foregoing, the assertion that anything whatsoever might readily be a first principle of simple bodies, except earth, but at the same time not examining into their mode of generation one from another, how they are produced. Now, I mean fire and water, and earth and air, for, partly by concretion, and partly by separation, are things produced from one another. This was an error of theirs. But this, in regard of the being prior and posterior, will involve the greatest difference. For indeed, earth would appear to be a thing most elementary of all, from which, as a first principle, elements are produced by concretion. But a thing of this kind would be most minute in its parts, and a thing most refined amongst bodies. Wherefore, as many as establish fire as a first principle would make assertions particularly in consonance with this theory. But each philosopher also acknowledges something of this sort to be an element of other things, I mean an element of bodies. No one, at least of subsequent speculators, even of those who assert the universe to be one, has thought fit to maintain earth to be an element, doubtless on account of the size of the component particles. But each of the three elements has obtained a certain umpire. For indeed, some assert fire to be this, but others water, and some air. Although why, pray, do they not assert this of earth, as the majority of men do? For they say that earth constitutes all things. But Hesiod also says that earth was the first produced amongst bodies. Thus it has happened that the supposition is an ancient and vulgar one. According indeed, therefore, to this account, if one affirms to be this either any one thing belonging to these save fire, or if one lays down, as such, a thing denser than air indeed, but more refined than water, he would not make such an assertion as this correctly. But if that which is subsequent in generation be prior in nature, and if that which has been digested and compounded together be a thing that is subsequent in its production, there would take place that which is the contrary of these. Water, for instance, would be a thing prior to air, and earth to water. With regard to those who are for establishing one such cause as we have declared, let these remarks be sufficient. But the same assertion may be made even if any one posits these corporeal principles as being many in number, as, for example, Empedocles, who says that 4 bodies elementarily constitute matter. For, likewise, to this philosopher, partly, indeed, the same consequences, but partly those that are peculiar to his own system, must needs happen. For also we see, in the case of things that are being produced from one another, that the fire and earth do not always continue as of the same body. But we have spoken on these subjects in our Physics, and respecting the cause of things that are being moved, whether we must assign one or 2 such, we should be inclined to think that we have not expressed ourselves either correctly or altogether irrationally, and, in short, must the principle of alteration be overturned by those who make assertions in this way. For not from heat will arise cold, nor from cold heat. For what change the contraries themselves would undergo, and what would be the one nature which should become fire and water, that very philosopher, I mean Empedocles, does not declare. But if any one should suppose that Anaxagoras mentions 2 elements, he would form his opinion most especially in accordance with a theory which, although that philosopher himself did not enunciate distinctly, yet, indeed, would, as a necessary consequence, follow in the footsteps of those who introduced this dogma. For otherwise would even the assertion be absurd, that all things from the beginning have been in a state of mixture, both on account of its happening that all things prior to this should pre-exist in an unmixed state, and on account of its not being consonant to nature, that anything at random should be mingled with anything at random too. And in addition to these reasons, we may add that, according to this doctrine, their passive states and accidents would be separated from substances. For to the same things belong mixture and separation. If any one, however, follows up the subject arranging into clauses together those statements which he wishes to make, he would, in all probability, utter assertions that would assume an air of novelty. For when there was nothing in existence that has been separated, it is obvious that no true assertion could be put forward in regard of that substance. Now I say, for instance, that it would not necessarily be a thing either white, or black, or darkish, or any other colour, but a thing necessarily colourless, for otherwise it would possess some one of these colours. In like manner would it be with that which is insipid, according to this same mode of reasoning. Nor could it be so with anything else of those things that are similar. For neither is it possible that it could possess any actual thing of a certain quality, or quantity, or that anything else be so. For therein would be inherent something of those termed partial forms. Yet this is impossible when all things have been in his system mingled together, for already it would subsist in a state of separation. But with the exception of mind, he affirms all things to be mingled, and that mind only is unmixed and pure. Now, from these statements it is consequential with him that he should denominate as the first principles both unity, for this is simple and unmixed, and another thing, as if it were an entity, such as we are for establishing, viz. The indefinite prior to its having been defined, and to partaking of a certain form. Therefore the assertion is made neither correctly nor clearly, notwithstanding that he intends something similar with both those who subsequently make statements to this effect, and more in harmony with the present phenomena. For these, however, happen only to be familiar with the theories appertaining to generation and corruption and motion. For also, with regard to such a substance, they investigate almost only both the first principles and the causes. But as many as frame their speculation respecting all entities, but of entities have set down some, indeed, as being cognizant by sense, and others as not being sensibles, it is manifest that they institute for themselves an inquiry concerning both kinds. Wherefore, one might be induced in preference to linger upon an investigation respecting these, as to what they say, well or not well, in regard of the examination of those speculations now proposed by us. Those, indeed, called Pythagoreans in a far more outlandish manner employ their first principles and elements than the physiologists, but the cause is, because they have not derived them from sensibles. For those natures that are mathematical amongst entities are without motion, except those pertaining to astrology. They, however, discuss and treat of all points concerning nature, for they both generate the heaven, and respecting the parts thereof, and the passive conditions, and the operations thereof, they closely observe that which takes place, and upon these they lavish their first principles and causes, as if acknowledging to the rest of the natural philosophers that whatsoever thing is such as is cognizant by the senses, that this constitutes entity, and such as that which is called heaven comprises. But the causes and the first principles, as we have said, they affirm are sufficient both to secure a transition even to a higher order of entities, and that they are more sufficient than those that are in harmony with physical theories. From what mode, however, there will be motion, merely on the supposition of the existence of the subjects of finite and infinite, and odd and even, they in no wise declare, or how it may be possible without motion and change that there should be generation and corruption, or the operations of those bodies that are whirled along the heaven. But further, whether one grants to them that from these results magnitude, or whether this should require to be demonstrated, nevertheless, in a certain manner, some bodies will be light indeed, and some involving weight. For the things from which they adopt for themselves their theories and make assertions, they in no respect affirm in regard of sensibles in preference to mathematical bodies. Therefore, concerning fire or earth, or the other bodies of such a kind, they have declared nothing whatsoever, inasmuch as affirming, in my opinion, nothing that is peculiar to them concerning sensible natures. But further, how must we receive as causes the passive conditions of number, and the number itself as the cause of entities which subsist in the heaven, and of things that are being produced there, both from the beginning and at present, and at the same time allow that there is no other number save this number from which the order of the universe consists? For since, indeed, in this portion of the creation, according to these philosophers, there may be in existence opinion and opportunity, but a little above, or a little below, injustice and separation, or mixture, and since they may adduce a demonstration that each one of these is number, and it happens from this mode of reasoning in this place that there subsists already a multitude of constituted magnitudes, from the fact of these affections following each of these places respectively, on the supposition of the foregoing, we may ask whether, therefore, is this owing to the same number as that which is in the heaven, and which we ought to receive because that each of these exists, or, besides this, is there another number? For Plato says, indeed, that there is a different number. He, however, also thinks both these, and the causes of these, to be numbers, but numbers that are, indeed, intelligible causes, whereas those are merely sensible, according to Plato. Respecting, then, indeed, the Pythagoreans, let us leave off our present discussions, for it is sufficient thus far to have touched upon their system. Chapter 9. But They who put forward ideas as causes in their early investigations, indeed, to acquire the causes of these entities, in the first place have adduced other things equal in number to these, as if one, desiring to have reckoned certain things when these were less numerous, would consider this impossible, but, by creating a greater number, should succeed in counting them. For almost equal, or not less numerous, are the forms than those things respecting which, in investigating their causes, they have advanced from these to those. For according to each individual thing, there is a certain homonymous form, and in addition to the substances also of other things, there is the unity involved in the notion of plurality, both in the case of these and of things that are eternal. Moreover, in the ways in which it is demonstrated that there are forms, according to none of these doth the substance of forms become apparent. For indeed, from some there is no necessity, in the sequence of the reasoning, that a syllogism arise, but from other things also, not of such as we should expect to find forms. Of these are their forms generated. For, according to the rational principles deducible from the sciences, will there be forms of all things, of as many as there are sciences, and in accordance with the argument, for ideas founded on the notion of unity involved in plurality, will there also be forms or ideas of negations, and according to the ability to understand something of what has been destroyed of things liable to decay, will there also be forms, for of these there is a certain phantasm. But further, as regards the most accurate of the arguments for the ideal theory, some of them indeed frame ideas of things relative, of which they do not say that there is an essential genus, whereas others speak of there being a third man. And upon the whole, the theories respecting forms overturn the things which they who affirm the existence of forms would wish should have a subsistence, in preference to the subsistence of the ideas. For it happens that the duad is not the first, but that the number is, and that the relative is, before the essential, and all those consequences ensue, as many as certain, who have followed up the opinions respecting forms, have set in contrariety to first principles. Further also, according to the supposition in virtue of which we speak, of the existence of the ideas, not only will there be forms of substances, but of many other things also. For also there is the one conception, not only respecting substances, but also in the case of other substances. And there are sciences, not only of substance, but of different things also, and innumerable other things of this sort occur. But according to necessity, and the opinions respecting forms, it follows on the supposition that forms are things capable of participation, that there should be ideas of substances only. For not according to accident are they participated in, but things must participate in this respect in each idea, so far forth as each idea is not predicated about the subject. Now I mean, for example, that if anything participates in the twofold itself, this also is a participant in what is eternal, but according to accident, for it is accidental for the twofold to be eternal. Therefore the forms will be substance. For the same things, both here and there, signify substance, or what will be the meaning of the assertion of the existence of a something that is independent of sensibles, drawn from the argument founded on unity, involved in the notion of plurality, and if there be the same form of the ideas, and of things that are participants of them, there will be something in common. For by no means, in the case of perishable duads, and indeed most duads, but such as are eternal, is the duad said to be rather one and the same than in the case of this, and one of some particular thing. But if there be not the same form, there would be an homonymy, and it will be just like as if one should call both Callias and a piece of wood a man, discerning no community whatever between them. 1. But most of all would one feel perplexed as to what at all the forms contribute, either to those things that are eternal amongst sensibles, or to things that are being produced and being corrupted. For neither are they to them a cause of any motion or change whatever, but truly neither are they of any assistance towards the science of other things. For neither are those the substance of these, for in such a case they would be in these. Nor do they contribute towards the existence of other things, inasmuch as they are not inherent in things that are their participants, at least, for so indeed they would perhaps be supposed as causes, just as if the white were mixed with the white, it might be called the cause of a white body. But indeed this theory is very easily overthrown, which Anaxagoras indeed first, and Eudoxus subsequently, and certain others advanced. For it would be easy to collect together also many impossibilities in reference to such an opinion. But truly neither do other things subsist from forms in accordance with any mode of existence of those that are wont to be mentioned. But the assertion that these forms are exemplars, and that the rest of entities participate in them, is to speak vain words, and to utter poetic metaphors. For in what respect, may I ask, does that which operates look towards the ideas as a model? For it is possible that anything whatever that is similar both should exist and be produced, and yet that it be not made like in reference to that to which it is similar. Wherefore also, on the supposition of the existence and non-existence of Socrates, just such another one as Socrates is would be produced. And in like manner is it evident that this would follow even though Socrates were eternal. And besides, there will be many exemplars of the same thing. Wherefore also the forms, for instance, of man, such as animal and biped, and at the same time also ideal man, will have a subsistence. Further, not only of things sensible are forms the exemplars, but also of forms themselves. As, for example, the genus as a genus will be an exemplar of species, wherefore an exemplar and an image will be the same thing. Further, it would seem impossible for the substance to be separate from that of which it is the substance. Therefore, in what way can the ideas, when they are substances of things, exist separately from them? But in the Phaedo, an assertion is made to this effect, that the forms are causes of existence and of production. On the supposition, however, of the existence of forms, nevertheless, those things that are participants will not be produced, if there be not in existence that which is likely to be the origin of motion. And many other things are produced, such as a house and a ring, of which we do not say that there are forms. Wherefore it is evident that it is possible also for other things both to exist and be produced from such causes, likewise on account of which also arise those entities mentioned just now. 2. Moreover, if forms are numbers, how will they be causes? Whether is it because entities are different numbers, as for instance, this particular man is this particular number, indeed, and Socrates another, and Callias another, different from both. In what respect are those therefore the causes of these? For neither will it make any difference whether those may be eternal, and these not so. But if it is because the things here are proportions or ratios of numbers, as for instance a symphony, it is obvious that there will be a certain one thing at least amongst those of which there are ratios or proportions. Now, if this is one thing, say matter, it is palpable that the actual numbers also will be certain proportions of one thing with another. But I say, for example, if Callias is a proportion in numbers of fire, and earth, and water, and air, to certain other subjects will belong the same man likewise. And if the idea constitute a number, the ideal man also, whether the idea may be a certain number or not. nevertheless will be a ratio in numbers of certain things without being himself a number, nor will there be a certain particular number on account of these things. Further, out of many numbers one number results, but from forms how is one form produced? And if forms are not produced from forms, but from the units that are in numbers, as for instance in the myriad, how is it with the subsistence of the monads? For if they are of the same species, many absurdities will ensue, but if they are not of the same species, neither will they be the same with one another, nor all the rest the same with all. For wherein will they differ, since they are impassive? For such statements as these are neither rational nor consonant with the understanding. And, moreover, it is necessary to establish a certain other description of number regarding which arithmetic is conversant, and all such things as are termed media by some, and how or from what principles will these arise? Or why will they be media between the things here and these? Further, the monads which are in each duad are from some prior duad, although such is impossible. Further, why is there an aggregated number as one thing? And further, in addition to the things that have been stated, if the monads are different, they ought to declare their opinions in the same way as those do, even as many as affirm the elements to be fourfold or twofold. For also each one of these mentions not what is common as an element, for example, body, but fire and earth, whether body is anything that is common or not. But now an assertion is made, just as if the one were in existence as homogeneous fire or water. But if this be the case, numbers will not be substances. It is, however, evident that if unity itself be anything, and if this be a first principle, that unity is expressed in many ways, for that it should be otherwise is impossible. But they who wish to refer substances to first principles set down lengths, indeed, as consisting from the long and the short, from something small and large, and a superficies as from what is broad and narrow, and a body from what is deep and low. In what way, however, will the superficies involve a line, or the solid a line and surface? For the wide and the narrow are a different genus from deep and low. As, therefore, neither number is inherent in these, because the much and the few are different from these, so it is manifest that neither will anything else of those superior natures be inherent in those that are inferior. But, truly, neither is the wide a genus of the deep, for body would be a certain surface in this case. Further, may I ask from what will points be compounded? This genus, indeed, then, did Plato also oppose, as being a geometric dogma, but he used to call it the first principle of a line, and this he often set down. I mean the existence of indivisible lines, although of necessity there must be some limit to these. Wherefore, from whatever principle a line is, therefrom also is a point. 3. And upon the whole, seeing that wisdom investigates into the cause, in respect of things that are manifest, this consideration indeed have we omitted, for we say nothing regarding the cause of the origin of the principle of change, but, thinking to mention the substance of these, we say that there are different substances, but in what manner those may be substances of these we ineffectually describe. For as to such being accomplished by participation, as also we have stated on a former occasion, there is no advantage gained in saying this. Neither truly are ideas such causes as we see to be a cause to the sciences, on account of which both every mind and every nature operate, nor that cause which we affirm to be one of the first principles do forms in any wise touch upon. But to men, in the present age, mathematics have become the philosophy, although they say that persons ought to cultivate these sciences for the sake of other sciences. But further, one may suppose the subject substance to be as matter that is more mathematical, and rather to be converted into a predicable, and to constitute a difference of substance and of matter, as, for instance, the great and the small, just as also the natural philosophers mention the rare and the dense, saying that there are these primary differences of the subject, for these are a certain excess and defect. And respecting motion, if, indeed, these will constitute motion, it is evident that the forms will be moved. But if they are not, whence has motion originated? For thereby the entire investigation about nature has been abolished. And what seems to be easy, namely, the demonstration that all things are one, does not turn out to be so. For according to the interpretation, all things do not become one, but a certain thing itself is one. If any one would grant that all things are so, and neither would he allow this, unless one would admit the existence of a universal as a genus, but this in some cases is impossible. But neither have those things that are after the numbers any grounds in reason, namely, both lengths and surfaces, and solids, nor is it so in regard of the mode of how they are, or shall be, or whether they involve any capacity, for these cannot possibly be either forms, for numbers they are not, or media, for those are mathematical, or things that are corruptible. But these, again, appear as the certain other fourth genus, different from those other three. But, upon the whole, the investigation of the elements of entities, seeing that they are expressed multifariously, it is impossible for any person to discover a solution of who have not divided them, and especially, if they investigate in this manner, from what sort of elements they are compounded. For action, or passion, or the wide, it is not, doubtless, possible to receive from some things of which these consist. But if this were the case, it would be possible to receive them as subsisting from substances only. Wherefore, either to investigate, or to think that you possess the elements of all entities, is not true. But how can any one learn the elements of all things? For it is evident that it is not possible that he should be previously a person having prior knowledge thereof. For, as to one learning geometry, it is indeed possible to see beforehand other things, but of such things as the science consists of, and concerning which he is about to receive instruction, he can have no prior knowledge. So also is it in the case of other things. Wherefore, if there is a certain science of all things, as some affirm, nothing could this person know beforehand. Every system of learning, however, subsists or is attainable by means of previous knowledge, either of all things, or of certain particular things, and either by demonstration is this accomplished, or by definitions. For those things whereof the definition consists it is requisite to understand beforehand, and that they be known. In like manner is it the case with knowledge by induction. But truly, if also it happens that there is in our possession a congenital knowledge of things, it is astonishing how we, in possession of the most excellent of the sciences, are unconscious of such a treasure. Further, how will any one know from what particulars all things consist, and how will this be manifest? For this also involves perplexity, for one would feel a doubt, just as also concerning some syllable. For certain affirm that S, M, A is composed of S and M and A, but others say that it possesses a different sound from its components, and none of those that are known. Moreover, those things of which there is perception by sense, how could any one know if he were not furnished with the capacity of perceiving by sense? Although one ought, if these are the elements of all things whereof they consist, just as the compound sounds arise from their own proper elements. That therefore all seem to seek the causes mentioned in our Physics, and besides these, that we have no other to adduce, is likewise from the foregoing statements evident. But the early philosophers, I admit, have treated of these causes, obscurely however, and indeed in a certain manner. All such four causes have been enumerated by speculators of an age prior to ours, and in a certain manner by no means has this been the case. For the earliest system of philosophy concerning all things was like unto one articulating with a stammer, inasmuch as it was new as regards first principles, and a thing the first in its kind. For Empedocles says that a bone exists from form by the principle of composition, but this is the essence and the substance of that thing. But truly, if this be admitted, in like manner also is it necessary that of both flesh and everything else of the other things there should subsist this principle of concretion, or that it should not subsist as a principle of anything at all. For on account of this are both flesh and bone, and each of the other things in existence, and not on account of the matter, which he says is fire, and earth, and water, and air. But also with any other indeed who would make these assertions, he would of necessity concur, but he has not expressed himself with clearness respecting them. The case regarding such points, therefore, has been made evident on a former occasion, but as many doubts as any one might indulge in respecting these same we will a second time enumerate, for perhaps we shall thereby acquire a facility for having our difficulties resolved in reference to subsequent questions of doubt. End of Chapter 9 and end of Book 1 of Metaphysics. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.